right, thank you, John. I do want to put everyone's mind at ease. I know that you probably see these microphones that we have on, and I want to let you know that we will not be breaking into any boy band dance numbers or singing numbers during the show today. I'm sorry, we just don't have that talent. But we will talk about the managed cloud quite a bit. What we want to talk about now, I think John just shared with you the recent announcement with Microsoft, and if you think about the managed cloud, it really is about getting help from experts and getting help from others. And so we this week announced with Microsoft the support of Office 365, and here to share a little bit more about that and to introduce our next speaker is our Chief Revenue Officer, Todd Cione.
Good morning. It is exciting to be in New York City today. I've got a new affinity for the city, I must say. Last week, if you followed the NFL draft, there was an important selection the New York Jets made of their future starting quarterback, Bryce Petty from Baylor University. I'm an alum. Very exciting to see him come into your fine city. So one of the reasons I'm excited today to be here is to talk to you about a quick trend and also make an introduction. So the trend that I am seeing in the marketplace has to do with the conversations that I get to have every day with customers, with prospective customers, with business partners, and actually with analysts. And really there are common themes that we see in the market. Gone are the days that businesses are asking should they take advantage of the cloud, and really it is how they're going to take advantage of the cloud and what help do they need to get the value from the cloud. And the exciting thing is there are common use cases that we see customers and businesses using to get to the cloud first. One of those common use cases is productivity, email, collaboration, instant messaging, video. One of the leading platforms in collaboration is Office 365. And as John Keitt stole my thunder and explained that we just released a new offering to manage and provide a managed service on top of Office 365 yesterday. And it's very exciting. It's a brand new offering that we've had lots of market demand around, and it's just the beginning of Rackspace managing industry-leading platforms. We're also managing Google Applications for Business platform as well. So really, really exciting days ahead. Now, in addition to that, I've got the privilege of introducing TJ Keitt. Now, TJ is an industry-leading analyst with Forrester. He focuses specifically on the collaboration portion of the cloud market, and today he's going to talk to you about the information advantage and what that means to businesses, how you can take advantage of collaboration in the cloud and make an impact to your business. So if you can help me with a warm welcome of TJ Keitt to the stage.
The best is yet to come, and babe, won't it be fine?
Well, thank you for that warm introduction, and thank you for the warm welcome. I started this with a question: can you build an information advantage? And I feel that I'm putting you at a disadvantage. It's like dropping you in the middle of a story and then not giving you any direction on which way you should go. I think we should back up for a moment and talk about, first and foremost, what an information advantage is, and then even, I think more importantly, why you think, or why one is important to an organization like yours. Now, if we start with that last question, why is an information advantage important? I think it's really because of two words: customer experience. I'm not sure that any of you thought I was going to say customer experience when I said that there were two words that make an information advantage important. But if you think about the list of speakers that you just saw put up here on the stage, the tenders of the world and so on, really what they're driving toward and really why they're coming to Rackspace is to help them build a technology portfolio that allows them to deliver a great experience to their customers. And in order to have the insight, to have the ability to deliver that experience, they're going to need something like what we're going to talk about here, this information advantage. Now, this idea of a customer experience is one that is muddled in the marketplace because everyone defines it a little bit differently. So if you permit me a moment, I'll explain to you how Forrester thinks about customer experience, and then we'll move from there. So Forrester defines a customer experience as really the perception that an individual has when they interact with your organization. So it's a perception. It's how I feel after working with your company. Now, this perception is not built strictly by the actions that I take as an organization. It's actually the culmination of an ecosystem that's comprised of your partners, your employees, and yes, other customers that you have, all working in concert in the context of an operating environment. So you have, really your customer-facing layer here, where you have your contact center agents, where you have your channel partners, and where you have other customers talking to each other inside of perhaps marketing communities and so on. Then you have your back office area, where you have perhaps your IT department, where you have groups like your finance department, and all of these individual actors play a role in influencing what happens to that customer when they interact with your company. If you have set up certain billing terms and it becomes very difficult for me to pay your company, for the services that I'm looking to procure from you, that could potentially be a problem that the finance department has set up. So they become part of this ecosystem. And then finally, there's the idea of the operating environment. So that's the technology that you brought to bear. That's perhaps the weather. That's perhaps other customers and the perceptions that they have when they work with other customers in terms of looking at your solutions. So if we think about this operating environment and what it means for the actors in this ecosystem, it really affects how these groups interact. So what do I mean by that? Well, there is a sense of value that each individual actor inside of your customer experience ecosystem takes away. And the more value that an individual believes that they get from those interactions, the more likely they are to stick around. So you're trying to create strong senses of value between your partners, your employees, and your customers. But all that value is affected by what's happening in that operating environment. So we're here in New York City. Dodd-Frank is obviously affecting the financial services industry in terms of what is expected of banks and other financial institutions in terms of how they interact with their customers and their partners, affecting the value that they deliver. If you're in a publicly traded company, Sarbanes-Oxley, when it came onto the books, affected how you interacted with the government and the exchange of value that you had there. If we're talking about disruptive entrance into the marketplace, we have Tinder coming up to the stage, which is obviously disrupting traditional matchmaking services if those still exist. You've got Uber disrupting the delivery business. You have Netflix, which disrupted companies like Blockbuster, which no longer exist, which is good because I think I still have an overdue movie. But again, rapid change brought by kind of another factor in the operating environment. And then finally, these unstable economic conditions that we often find. So I think we all lived through the 2008 downturn, where we saw companies have their entire business model disrupted, as well as seeing their customers adversely affected by what was going on in the marketplace, by what was happening to them economically. And so the value that those people were looking for when they interacted with the organization changed because, again, their economic situation had changed and perhaps they weren't willing to spend as much as with you. Perhaps they were looking for a different type of service from you to help them navigate this issue. So if we take all those things together, this operating environment, which is in constant flux, and the complexities of having to deal with partners and customers and employees all working together simultaneously to deliver value to one another and to enhance that customer experience, then the organization that can quickly connect people with information about what's happening in that operating environment, what's happening with those partners, what's happening with those customers, in a way that allows them to create and make smart decisions, is the organization that will succeed in their marketplace. So if we think about this practically, I mentioned Netflix. How many of you here are big fans of the show House of Cards? I see a few hands go up. Netflix determined that they were going to distribute House of Cards by looking at their subscriber data and discovering that subscribers liked political thrillers, and so maybe they should produce one. But again, you need to have that information and the ability to act upon it in a fairly rapid fashion in order to come to that kind of conclusion. So, information advantage is this, essentially. How well can you do this? gather that information, and then distribute it to your employees in a way that helps them make those decisions. This obviously brings me to the fast food industry. Now, if you're a purveyor of burgers and fries, you've obviously seen that you have a lot of competition in this marketplace, and you really are at the whims of the fickle palates of your customers. So when I think about a company like Red Robin Gourmet Burgers, which is a 44-year-old company that is best known, I think, for the commercial that say "Yum" at the end of them, what you have here is one of their newer offerings, which is called the Tavern Double. Now, what's important about the Tavern Double is that it was really kind of the test case for how they were going to create their information advantage. When they looked out over the marketplace and saw all those other signs sitting around them, what they realized was we have to, first and foremost, be able to understand how customer palates are changing and how we're going to respond. And then secondarily, to ensure that we're able to consistently deliver that experience that our customers are expecting, how can we ensure that we keep enough of those employees around so that we're not constantly having to go and rehire people? And so to do those two things, what their, I guess at the time, he's leaving at this point, their CIO and Senior Vice President of Business Transformation, a guy named Chris Lapping, did, was he looked out over the marketplace and said, I need technology to help me do this. I need collaborative technology to help me create the pathways of information to connect my 22,000 employees inside the restaurant locations with our operational people and with our people in the training group to ensure that we're able to consistently see what's happening in the market, make changes on the back end, and then push those changes out. So what they deployed was a technology that, if you go into Office 365 or if you've worked with them as an independent, Yammer, then you'll know that kind of it's a activity streaming technology that allows for seamless communications. And so what Red Robin did in this case was they said, look, let's put this technology in the hands of our restaurant staff, and let's let them do things like give us real-time feedback on things like the Tavern Double. So when we launch that into the marketplace, what are people saying about it? What are they thinking about the taste? What are they thinking about the recipe? So that we can begin to make changes about that in a more rapid fashion than the 18 months it usually takes us to roll out, iterate on, and then redeliver a new menu item to the marketplace. And then also, let us also use this technology to put more information in the hands of those restaurant staffers so that as they complete our training program and they see issues that weren't covered in our standard training program, they could talk to one another, but then they could also recommend fixes. So when we talk about kind of this, what they're delivering here, we call this freedom of action, which is kind of an important thing here when we talk about the information advantage. Freedom of action really is these three issues here. It's first and foremost the ability to access and use information, which is what we kind of described. Then it's the second, it's the idea that you're able to interact with others as necessary. So you have information, you need expertise. Can we link those two things together? And then finally, can you use those things irrespective of your location? Can you move about? If I'm talking about a staff of people, those 22,000 people inside of restaurants, they're not seated behind a desk every single day. They need to have that technology delivered to them on a mobile device so that they can move around the restaurant. And so what we saw Red Robin do is, look, they took that, they began putting their recipes, their operational standards, their memos and things of that nature into this Yammer environment, allowing for more continuous conversation about what was happening inside those restaurant locations, but also allowing for those managers inside those restaurant locations to have a clear conduit back into the operational group so that if they had a problem, they could easily reach that individual and not have to go through the entire corporate directory to find the right person. Also, if we're talking about the training program, again, it's that idea that we could augment what we were doing in a standard training program by providing a lot of documentation and interaction with other Red Robin employees inside of that environment. When we're talking about this idea of freedom to interact with others, again, it's that idea of that open communication, as well as the ability for those employees in the restaurant location to say, look, I figured out a better way of cleaning a soft serve ice cream machine. So let me recommend that to the trainers so that they can take a look at this and see if this should be the corporate standard, which was an example that Chris Lapping liked to use, which I assume means that someone in the restaurant did figure out a better way of cleaning a soft serve ice cream machine. And then the third idea here was to make it accessible. Red Robin had already been deploying about 1,700 iPads across their restaurant locations. And so they just rolled out Yammer applications on those iPad apps, or on those iPads, allowing those employees to have access to that technology as they moved about the restaurant location. And because they had those cameras on the back, it allowed them to actually have that two-way conversation. I see a problem here, let me video record it. And then let me send that back to the company via the Yammer stream so that they can begin to have an idea of what we're seeing here on the ground. Now, this all seems well and good, that Yammer was able to help Red Robin in this fashion. And then the results, again, prove themselves out because when they talk about the Tavern Double, they talk about the reduction of a product life cycle from 18 months down to 1. And when they talk about employee churn, they talk about a reduction of about 9% in their churn because of this type of training program. But if you look at your organization, you ask, okay, so how do we then go about creating a social business, which is, that is able to create that freedom of action that's going to help you have that information advantage? What are the steps that you should be taking? So we have a bunch of technologists here. So obviously the first question is, what should we think about from a technology perspective? Well, what we're seeing in the marketplace is exactly what our friends here at Rackspace have been telling us, that we are seeing a movement towards using software as a service as a way of delivering collaboration technology to employees. I like to call this the inexorable march towards the cloud in this space. So we've been tracking this since 2011. And what you'll see is that progressively that bar has been getting bigger in terms of companies' interest in an implementation of software, collaboration software as a service, either to complement or replace their on-premises collaboration technology. Even more importantly is that by 2014, when we talk about complement versus replace, more companies are interested in replacing their on-premises technology instead of just complementing it. So we are seeing kind of a shift over as companies think about where best to implement this. And the reasons why that companies think that this is important are kind of pretty self-explanatory if you think about the example that I just gave with the Yammer and Red Robin. But to put a fine point on it, if we think about kind of from the employee perspective, that employee part of your customer experience ecosystem, then it's really about lowering the barriers to employee responsiveness. So if you can get more employees involved, if you're not just looking to the managers, but if you're also getting the floor staff at Red Robin to contribute to this conversation about what's happening in the restaurants, then you can start to drive towards smarter decision making because you're getting a bigger representation of what's happening in the inside of your operating groups. Then you're also able to kind of look at a higher employee engagement because if you think about from a perspective of an individual, one thing that we know is that people like to feel like their contributions or what they're doing at their job actually contributes to the overall success of the business, like they actually have value. So if you're able to do something like help an employee or allow an employee to make a recommendation about how the organization can operate more efficiently, and you accept that, or at least acknowledge that they actually have meaningful things to contribute, well, then you can bind those individuals closer to you. And I think the proof is in the pudding when we talk about Red Robin reducing their churn by approximately 9% by having that more participatory model when it comes to collaboration, when it comes to operational efficiency inside the restaurant. The second thing that we think about here is on that partner component of your customer experience ecosystem, it actually reduces that wall. So if we think about kind of all the issues that we've seen historically when it comes to working with partners, there's always that firewall issue. Do we allow our partners behind the firewall? How can we go to the IT department and ask them to give more access to our partners? And what's their response going to be? Are they going to give us a hard time? Are they going to make us go through some kind of big extraditing process? And so when you can begin to do that, when you begin to reduce that wall, you simplify the interactions, you allow for better project coordination, and ultimately you allow for your organization to co-create solutions with those partners more efficiently. So Royal LePage up in Canada uses Google Apps as a mechanism to help their brokers deliver a more collaborative house buying experience to those prospective homeowners. Royal LePage is a real estate concern, and the brokers use Google Apps as a way of collaboratively looking at listings with those prospective home buyers. So by delivering that capability to those customers, that becomes important. Now, what you have to realize is that technology in and of itself is not going to make you an efficient company, is not going to give you that information advantage. You have to change human behaviors as well as business processes. So it might be a little bit hard to see, but what we're talking about here in this diagram is a sales process in which I'm trying to figure out, can we pursue this lead? Are we going to lose this deal? What are the what are the costs that go into this? And how do we create these materials? And what you see over and over again, and how humans navigate these processes, is that they sometimes duplicate efforts, sometimes they miss things, and that's because people get kind of embedded in these traditional ways of working, but they also sometimes just kind of overlook things. And so you have to change processes and as well as change behaviors to ensure that the people can take advantage of the technology you're putting before them. So you also have to have a kind of a burning bridge for change, a burning platform for change, because that focuses the mind. And so some of the things that we've seen work in the past to get people to make these changes is to talk about disruptions in the marketplace. We talked about a bunch of them: Uber, Tinder, and so on. Failure of a business model. We saw a lot of that in 2008. The bottom fell out of a lot of companies, and so that actually led to a lot of organizations saying we have to do something differently here. Then you have changing an operating model. We're expanding globally. We want to work differently as we expand globally. So how do we get more people involved in these decisions? And then finally, changes in key constituencies. So you see this a lot in government. People are more social, so how do we get people more involved? Now, to do this, we think about POST, it's an acronym that provides a framework for this. It stands for people. What do people need? Objectives. What are the business objectives that you have to actually hit in order to create this change, to create this information advantage? Strategy. Based on those objectives you want to hit, what strategically should we be doing? And then finally, and only then, do you think about the technology as a tactic to achieve that strategy, to hit those objectives, to help those people. So where do you start? Here's kind of the final question. Well, first and foremost, you need that vision as to what it is you think your social business is going to be. What type of information advantage do you think that you require? What market conditions are you trying to account for? And then how are you going to help employees through your use of collaborative technology and change in business processes that are going to help them reach that vision? Second, assess your organization's readiness. Not every company is a collaborative organization. There are silos, there are competitive silos, there are cultural barriers that some companies have. I hoard information to keep my job, for example, that you have to kind of look at and see, what do we have to change there? Third, marshal the resources that you need to define this strategy. You're going to need executives on board. You're going to need middle management to be bought in, because those are going to be blockers. And if they're not invested in this idea, if they don't see the value of collaboration, of a more social operating model, then it's not going to succeed. You're just going to have silos in which people are productive in this way, and then you're going to have other places where this just passes them by. You're going to have to create the platform for change. There are always things happening in your operating environment, be it disruptive competitors or changes in the operating model that you can kind of glom onto to make these changes, to ensure that your technology changes carry through and have the effect that you want. And then finally, use that POST methodology that we ran through to kind of think about, what do we need to help people do in order to make these changes that we're looking for. And so with that, I thank you for paying attention during this time, and I'll hand it back over.